Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
All right, let's start with when it all started for you in racing. When did it hit you that you first wanted to become an announcer in NASCAR?
I don't know that there's really ever a day I can point to. I grew up in Vermont, about 10 or 15 miles from one of the best short tracks in the country. And my uncle used to come over, drive from New Hampshire, drive an hour and a half each way to go to that racetrack. When I got like 5 or 6 years old, he realized I got a perfectly good nephew right up the road. Maybe I'll drag him along with me. And from the first time I ever went to the racetrack, that's all I ever wanted to do, man. I just thought race cars were the coolest thing on the planet. In terms of being an announcer, I started out as a fan. I worked on some race cars when I was a kid. I drove very badly for a very brief period of time. And that little racetrack that I grew up at was owned by Ken Squire, who was, of Squire Hall Award fan, CBS Sports fan. And when Ken started getting really busy with CBS and couldn't be there every weekend to do the PA work at his own racetrack, he was looking around for somebody to replace him. And I was writing a little column for one of the local regional racing trade papers. And I think, in hindsight, he probably read some of my stuff and said, well, here's a kid that's got a workable vocabulary and loves the sport. So he kind of dragged me in and said, come on, I'm going to teach you how to be a public address announcer, which, was like striking gold. When Ken Squire offers to teach you how to do what he does. Yeah. So, and from there, it just kind of just progressed year by year. I'd work at one racetrack, and then I'd work at another racetrack, and then I'd have 3 tracks a week, and then I'd have 4 tracks a week, and then I'd have a traveling tour deal, and and we just worked really hard at that for a lot of years, put a lot of miles on, and then Ken got me an opportunity to audition for MRN like 25 years ago, and the rest is history.
So talk about your first experience at a NASCAR race as a fan before you even became a professional in the sport.
As a fan, the first time I ever went to a cup race as a fan, some buddies and I from New England hooked a pop-up camper behind the car, 5 of us in a little tiny pop-up camper, and went to Martinsville. And I don't know, we went to the race, but I think we drank more beer than we did actual watching racing.
How old were you?
I was probably 20.
Okay.
Maybe I wasn't, maybe allegedly, but we just went there and we camped out in that camper and drank a ton of beer, like I said, the first night, and that was back where the campground used to sit literally right next to the railroad tracks at Martinsville before they moved the railroad tracks back. And I remember at 6 a.m. in the morning, everybody's passed out in the camper, and that train came through and laid on the horn, and we thought sure as hell that we were laying in the middle of the railroad tracks or whatever. But yeah, that was my first ever cup racing. We go to Dover because it was close. I remember one year sitting on top of a camper watching a race in the infield at Dover, and Harry Gant lapped the field like 3 times. It was the worst race ever. We didn't care, man. We loved it.
So obviously Ken Squire is your hero. He's your
Huge.
mentor.
Yeah.
So was it 25 years ago? When did you first meet Ken, and when did that whole thing start?
Well, I was always aware of Ken because he owned the racetrack, and he was huge in the state of Vermont. In terms of actually meeting Ken, speaking to Ken, I was probably 17 years old. It was probably the summer before my senior year in high school. And that's the time where he kind of reached out and, put the grab on me and said, come in here, I need you to help me with this. And over the course of the next year and a half, we raced on Thursday nights at that racetrack. They still do. And every Thursday night I'd be up there in the booth and, and I'd announce practice or maybe a couple of little 4-cylinder heats or maybe a victory lane here and there. And he'd, and then I'd be in his office the next morning and he'd say, here's what here's the couple of things you did right and here's the 100 million things that you did wrong. Do this, do this, do this. And he just taught me so much about this sport.
So you're located up in the turns. You have such a unique view, a view that's a lot of us will never see. Can you pick out one favorite moment that you've seen, or does it still hit you when you see those cars coming around? Is it such a sight?
It does. Every year it hits me at Daytona for Speed Weeks. And I don't know if it's because we've had 2 or 3 months off and we haven't been there for a while. But when I'm standing up there, in the turn position, and you hear in the headset the drivers start your engines command, and they fire them up, and then they roll off pit road, and they just kind of come by you on that first pace lap. I still haven't gotten to the point, and I hope I never do get to the point where it becomes ordinary. I still, the hair stands up on the back of your neck, and it's like, holy crap, this is the Daytona 500. We're going to run the Daytona 500, and I get to be up here right in the middle of it. So I hope I never lose that. I don't think I ever will.
I don't think you will. So when the racing gets intense, they wreck, stuff like that. Have you ever had trouble making up quick descriptive words, or just as the years have gone by, you've become so quick when you see something, you're able to describe it?
Yeah,
to the people?
and I don't know. I mean, it's obviously a skill set that you cultivate to some degree, but I'm pretty convinced that either you have that ability or you don't. Either you have that ability to take what you see, process it quickly, and spit it back out accurately, or you don't. I don't think that somebody that doesn't have that ability can work at it and develop it. People that have the ability can fine tune it, which we all work hard to do even today. But I think you kind of have to have that innate play-by-play gene somewhere in your head to do it.
So obviously you had the SiriusXM Speedway, a very successful show. Talk about when that started, 12 years ago now.
Yeah.
I believe when Matt Kenseth won the championship.
Yep.
That was your first show. Let's talk about when that started.
We went on the air. Our first show was the day after Matt Kenseth won the championship. Yeah. Worst timing ever. I mean, why would you start your show on the day where every single driver and virtually every single crew chief, anybody you wanted to talk to, it's the day after the season. They're on a plane, they're on a beach, they've turned the phone off, right? So we start a show that day. And, the reason is because it takes a while to get stuff done. You have to go through the red tape, and you need to get everything done. So that's when the thing ended up starting. And I figured if we were lucky, we'd get a couple of years out of it, maybe, if we were lucky. Because, nobody knew we existed for the first couple of months, really. We were on the stick and ball play-by-play sports channel. They'd have a baseball show, and then they'd have a football show. And then, here we came, the knuckleheads, talking about stock car racing for 3 hours in the middle of the afternoon. We would come on and we'd do our 3 hours, and then we would be followed by World Soccer Daily, with a very prim and proper British bloke as the host. Stand by for World Soccer Daily. From the NASCAR fans to World Soccer Daily, we didn't transfer a single listener between them, but that's what we did for years.
Do you remember who your first guest on the show was, like as a driver or team owner on that show?
I can't swear to this because it's been 12 years. Yeah. I think our first guy was Brendan Gaughan.
Oh, wow.
I think the first race car driver we had was Brendan Gaughan. And I know Matt Kenseth was on our first show because he was the champion and he was contractually obligated, to make the media appearances. So we took full advantage of that. But I know that Brendan was on our first show, and he's been one of our, we call him our irregular regular ever since. He's just such a cool guy, and we love him. And he's had times where he's competed for championships in the various series, and he's had times in his Cup career where he wasn't running for a very good team, and he still jokes that back then we were the only ones that would talk to him. So we kind of trade that off now that now he comes and talks to us because we used to talk to him.
You have very interesting relationships with drivers. You have the opportunity to talk to all of them.
Yep.
But I spoke to AJ Allmendinger yesterday, and we joked about you a lot.
Don't believe anything he said. Yeah.
So you and him and Brendan Gaughan, you guys always get together so well on the radio.
Yeah.
Seems like you jab at each other, but it's all in good fun.
Well, and I've been here in some capacity or another since like 1984. So, most of these guys I predate by a significant amount of time. And just over the course of rote repetition. I mean, Jeff Gordon and I were talking about this the other day at the Champions 4 presser. Neither one of us could even begin to count how many times we sat side by side in adjoining chairs at various media functions, or in the garage area, or here in the trailer, or pre-race or post-race or whatever, or on the phone doing Speedway. I can't count how many times I've interviewed Jeff Gordon. And after a certain number of years, you develop a relationship with him where, they accept over time that you're not looking to spin them out. You're not looking to, to make a name on their back by saying something rotten about them or whatever. There's a trust there after a while.
So you work with Angie Skinner, David Rudiman, now Dustin Swedelson. So like, how is that transitioning from some people on your show and getting to know them?
Right.
Obviously, the monologues to start the show, you guys just talk about life.
Rudiman was never really a part of the show. He was never a co-host on the show.
Okay.
When we started out, it was myself and Susie. And then, Susie went off after a number of years to go off and do some different things. She's now back doing the news section of the deal. Angie came aboard a number of years ago and was up with us for however long it was, 3-4 years, I guess it was. And, it's a hard deal to do because on the face of it, you think, well, that's 4 hours a day. That's half the time that most people work. You're working a half a shift. But it's there every day, and you have to be so immersed in the sport, 24/7, in order to go on the air and start taking phone calls from people, and know that you're going to be able to answer intelligently whatever they ask you. You have to live it, and it just kind of, it's all enveloping, and it's hard. Susie came to the conclusion, and Angie came to the conclusion that I can't. It's hard to make the commitment to it because it just dominates your life after a while.
So now you're on NASCAR Race Hub every Monday with the Pulse. So you're getting even closer to guys like Larry Mack and Daniel Trotter. So how's that transition been to you, going on to having that little segment on TV?
Yeah, we've had a blast doing that, honestly, and that came from kind of humble beginnings because it came from a simple single segment. It was Danielle's idea. And she came down with a camera crew and sat across the desk from me before, as we were doing Speedway, and just kind of did a little feature on, here's the guy that does SiriusXM Speedway every day. And I guess, the fans reacted positively to it. Her bosses reacted positively to it. And pretty quickly it turned into, well, why can't we do this once a week? So now we're down there, and we have been kind of for the second half of this season doing our deal every Monday down there. It may not continue next year. If it doesn't, we've had a hell of a time. But yeah, we've had a great time doing it. Really enjoy it.
So how you handle callers is very unique. Like when someone calls in with their hard opinions, you ask for facts.
Mm-hmm.
You want research. So talk about handling those callers because you never do get frustrated. That's what you say.
No, I really don't. And in order to do my job, in order to work in talk radio, you've got to be a huge believer in free speech. You have to be a huge believer in, even if this guy is completely out to lunch, even if nobody on the planet agrees with him, you have to let him talk. Because you can't have talk radio if you don't allow people to talk. With that said, and my firm belief is everybody has the right to speak, but they don't have the right to speak forever. That at some point, if I'm a responsible host, I have to say, dude, what you just said has no basis in fact. And one of the things I say to people all the time is, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. There are a million opinions, but there's only one set of facts. And if you're not square with the facts, I'm going to point out that you're not square with the facts. And that's where the debate comes in, and that's where the back and forth comes in, and that's where people get energized. Because if everybody on the air agreed with everybody else, it would just be stultifyingly dull. I mean, Rush Limbaugh makes $1 billion for every penny I make, so he must be doing something right. But the only people that get on the air to talk to Rush Limbaugh are people that agree with Rush Limbaugh. It's always, Megadittos, Rush, I agree with everything you've ever said in your life. Well, of course you do, because I'm the smart, and that's great. He's doing a wonderful job, and he's very successful. I couldn't do that. I've never learned anything from talking. I learned from listening. So I want to hear what people have to say. And, if I get 3 calls in a row where people just want to blow air up my skirt and tell me what a great job I'm doing, it's like, okay, fine. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. But let's move on to somebody that's got something bigger to say.
I believe it was one caller. I believe his name was Matthew from Kentucky. He was asking you for advice about getting into PR at some sort of track. So every so often someone comes across you asking for advice.
Yeah.
I mean, how much does that mean to you when people come to
Oh,
you?
I love that. I love that. I wish I'd had somebody, well, I did in Kent, but I wish I'd had somebody I could go to and say, how do I do this? And the main problem I have is that people will come to me and say, I want to do your job. How do I be you? And I'll say, go to your local short track, volunteer to be the pit reporter or the victory lane interviewer, tell them you'll work for free. Well, I don't want to work for free. Well, then you don't want the job. You don't want this bad enough. I mean, we used to hook up, we'd drive out of Vermont, we'd drive 8 hours to Ontario, practice, qualify, race, climb back in the car at 11 o'clock at night and drive 8 hours home. And we'd do it again the next day to somewhere else. If you're not willing to do that, I mean, you really got to want to do it. To do that for peanut butter and jelly wages, beans and weenie wages, you got to love the sport. And if you're nobody, it seems like now everybody wants to start at least in the middle or at the top. I get people that call and say, how do I get a job driving a transporter for a Sprint Cup team? Well, you don't. You don't. These guys didn't start out at the Cup level. Cup officials didn't start at the Cup level. Cup drivers didn't. Cup crew members didn't. Cup broadcasters don't. Nobody starts at the top, but nobody seems to want to put the time in it.
So, do you believe that has something to do with social media and how technology has come up? Or, like, it's so much different than it was back when you started in the 70s and 80s?
It has changed things. It's changed things a lot. Some for the better, some for the worse. We're immersed in this sport now 24/7. When I was a kid, man, I used to sit in the living room and stare out the window waiting for my New England Speedway Scene newspaper to come on Friday so I could open it up and see who had won the races last weekend. It's not like that anymore. You're instantly connected now. And that's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing because you can just overload. You can overdose on NASCAR now. And the best way to be popular is to leave people hungry for more. And nobody ever has to be hungry for more anymore because there's just, in a 24-hour day, you can spend 27 hours doing NASCAR on the internet.
So a big part of your show is the Up to Speed segments and the Legends interviews. You've gotten to speak to just incredible people.
Yeah.
It's going to be tough, but can you pick out one that you believe that you really learned so much and that really stood out to you?
Well, I mean, some of them catch you by surprise. But, when you sit down with Richard Petty, you're doing something special. When you get Bobby Allison to tell you his life story, you know you're doing something special. Every once in a while you'll get one that you don't expect where somebody will just tell you something that you never knew, and those are a lot of fun. But when you look back at the roster of the people that we've been able to sit down and do those Legends Series interviews with, when Richard Childress says, come into my office, sit down, set up your microphones, we'll talk for a couple hours. It's special. It's fun.
On another note, Steve Burns passed away earlier this year. You got to speak to him. You know him very well. You had to go on air that day. I was actually the first call onto the show, so it was special to be a part of that. What is it like handling that side of the sport?
It's hard. It's really hard because, especially in the case of somebody like Steve, who was such a good personal friend. I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure. I think Steve's last on-air deal was with us. Because when we went to Speed Weeks in February, he couldn't go because he was too sick. He knew more about the seriousness of his condition at that point than we did. But we knew that he was really depressed about the fact that he couldn't go to Speed Weeks. So we called him up and we said, listen, we know you can't travel, but how about you co-host a show with me from Speed Weeks? I'll be in Daytona. You can be at home. We'll bring the equipment. We'll set it up at your house. If you can do a half hour, we'll do a half hour. If you can do an hour, we'll do an hour. If you can do the whole day, you're welcome to stay for the whole day. And he just lit up. Absolutely lit up. And we did the full 4 hours that day with him. And toward the end, I knew he was struggling a little bit. And Karen, his wife, subsequently after his passing, told me that he was just kind of hanging in there for the last hour or two, but he didn't want to stop, and we didn't want to stop because it was just so special to be able to spend the time with him, to put a smile on his face. And we knew that Steve wasn't going to win that fight, but we thought he was going to be able to fight longer than he did. It really turned very quickly, and that was a tough day.
it was very special to have that Bristol weekend where just NASCAR just dedicated the entire weekend to him, and he got to see so much love for weeks and months up to that. And you said he was in a weird way, he was lucky to be able to see that.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's the old saying, it's too bad people don't get to attend their own funerals. Because you see who turns out for you and who loved you and who talks well, and who has wonderful things to say about you. Steve was very fortunate in the last, certainly weeks of his life, if not months. There was just an endless parade of people who came up to him and embraced him and said, "You're important to us," So that was cool thing. A cool thing.
You're on the Hall of Fame voting panel. That's a really big thing for you. How appreciative are you to have that spot in such a...
I still can't believe they let me back in that room every year. I've done it for 5 or 6 years now, and I still kick myself when I get up, the morning of the vote and say, you get to go in that room and hang and sit next to Richard Petty and Junior Johnson and Ned Jarrett and all the greats of our sport and decide who gets into the Hall of Fame. And I know I'm one of 52 votes or whatever it is, but it's still an incredible honor to be invited to sit in that room. If I never said a word, that's fine. If they didn't let me cast a vote at the end, I don't care. Just to be able to sit in that room and listen to all the things that are discussed and said, it's special.
Speaking of Hall of Fame, Jeff Gordon should be in it in his future for sure. It's his final weekend here, so whether it be on track or something off track, what's one moment that sticks out to you in his career that you've covered?
It's so hard to pick one because he changed this sport. When he came in, NASCAR drivers were good old boys. The vast majority of them were from North Carolina. They were guys that wore cowboy boots and cowboy hats and big belt buckles and baseball caps were dirty baseball caps or whatever. They were tough guys, And here came Jeff Gordon, this tiny little guy. He wasn't tough in the physical sense of the word, and he came in with a fancy haircut and tried to do the mustache thing, but it didn't work. And he was carrying a briefcase, and he talked about things like investments and portfolios and marketing. And everybody's like, who is this guy? We've never seen anything like this. And he changed our sport so quickly and so much for the better. Before Jeff Gordon, you didn't get a shot at Cup until you're almost 30 years old. I mean, when Harry Gant was a perfect example. The guy won 1 million races all over the country before he ever got a chance to sit in a Cup car. Jeff Gordon changed all that. And it immediately went from, does he have enough experience, to how soon can we get an 18-year-old Jeff Gordon in our race car? And it really burned a lot of guys who were kind of caught in the transition, who were in their mid-20s and were thinking in the next couple of years, I'm going to get my shot. All of a sudden, they went from just a little too young to just a little too old. And they never got their shot.
Do you see similarities between Jeff and Tim Richmond? I spoke to Rick Hendrick a couple days ago, and he picked out some similarities because
there were some.
So different.
There were some. I mean, Richmond was obviously a much more flamboyant character. I mean, his lifestyle and just the way he dealt with people was just so out there. I mean, Tim Richmond exploded into a room. Jeff Gordon doesn't do that. Richmond would have won a ton of races. I don't know that he would ever have been as good a champion as Jeff Gordon has been, or as good a representative of the sport, because I don't think he worried about that. I don't think he cared about that, but there's no question he would have won 1 million races.
So you've been on SiriusXM Speedway for 12 years. How much time? How are you going to keep doing it until? How long do you plan on still doing it?
You get to the point where you're too old to change. And I'm still having fun doing it. I've said, not just about Speedway, but about the whole job, the whole deal. The day I get out of bed saying, damn, I gotta go to work today, that's when I'll stop. I get out of bed energized every day to go to work. I really enjoy what I do. And when that stops, I'll stop, but I don't see that happening.
I'll end the interview with the question that you end your interviews with. How would you like to be remembered in this sport as the impact that you've had?
I just, I don't worry about, gauging my impact or anything like that. I'm just a guy that showed up to work every day. I started in this business as a race fan. I came in as a race fan. I'll go out as a race fan. I don't see myself any differently than anybody that sits up in those grandstands, except for the fact that they have to buy a ticket. They're doing the hard part. They got to travel and buy the ticket. People fly me in. They put me in the hotel. They give me a pass to come into the racetrack. All I got to do is talk about it. I'd be doing that anyway, you know? So I guess if I'm going to be remembered, remember me as a guy that started as a race fan and that finished as a race fan.
So. Sounds good, Dave.
Okay, man.
I gotta tell you, man, I really appreciated this.
Thank you. I'm happy to do it.
I'm happy
to do it. All right, now, see if Chef Irvine